Hope, thank you for agreeing to be on the Headache Doctor podcast. We're excited to have you. I think this information is going to be really helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dr. Taves. This is great.
Yeah, okay. So the reason I wanted to have you on is to go down this road of talking about nutrition. I want to get very practical because people associate food, their own nutritional health with headaches and migraines, especially when it comes to triggers and things like that. But let's give people context. People like stories and they want to know who you are. So tell us a bit about who you are.
Yeah. So I am a certified holistic nutritionist. I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I am in lots of things here. Like I feel like yesterday I had an interview and she was like, "You're in a bunch of weird things," like in a good way though, because I love all the woo stuff. I love the health. I love the wellness. I love the woo. I'm Reiki. I'm certified in Reiki. I do human design. I have a brick and mortar Pilates and fitness studio. So really for me, it's like there's so many arms of like the wellness wheel, right? And I just like to be a part of all of them.
Yeah, I love that. So as far as like your credentialing, or like you said, functional, talk to my listeners about what that means.
Yeah.
Because we're probably on this podcast, we're probably bridging the gap between like what would be a traditional, like Western medicine model. We're separate from that.
Yeah.
But we're also not on the side of like Reiki.
Yeah.
So
that
we're
far
down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So give us an understanding. Like when you say the word functional and you're training in that, what does that mean?
Yeah. So essentially I'm getting to the root cause, right? So I use functional labs and screenings to help people get to the root cause of their issues. So for me, I work mostly with women. I have some men and kids every now and then, but mostly with women. And I'm doing all the functional labs to help them get to the root cause of their chronic symptoms. So I'm mostly working with women who are dealing with, hormonal things and autoimmune issues, a lot of like mystery symptoms where they go to the doctor and they do all the labs and the doctor's like, "Oh, your labs are fine," but they have, headaches and low energy and they can't sleep. So all these mystery symptoms. And so I use the labs, kind of put that together with their symptomology and kind of their history. And we come up with a protocol and we help get to the root cause of their issues.
Yeah. So you're working with people virtually in this context. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
But you also have Pilates studios.
Yes. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. I have the brick and mortar, like in-person business, and then I get my online business. So yeah, I have a brick and mortar Pilates and fitness studio. And that's kind of where that kind of led me down the path, I feel like, of this nutrition piece. I was a dancer. My background is in dance, and I danced for 23, 4, 5 years, something like that. And so that led me into Pilates, which led me into my studio. And it was when I opened my studio and I realized like I really wanted to give people kind of this like comprehensive experience. Like I wanted to give them this full wellness experience. So it's not just about the movement. And so I wanted to give them this nutrition piece. And so I started out I just like a basic nutrition coaching course or something online just to give them let me just give them basic guidance. But then when I started working with women, they were coming to me for quote, like they wanted to lose weight or whatever, they wanted to tone up and lose weight. When I'm working with this woman, I'm realizing like there's so many deeper issues at play. Like there's hormonal issues and there's inflammation and there's these deeper issues where like I'm realizing like, okay, the weight is just another symptom of something that's going on like deeper under the surface. So that kind of launched me into this whole other realm of like functional nutrition and all of this so I can help them get to the root cause of what's really causing their issues.
Yeah. So a couple things. We met just a week ago, actually, on your podcast. So share a little bit about your podcast, the context of, what you're trying to do there. And then I think that'll help people kind of understand this mission that you're on.
Yeah. So my podcast is the Hopeful and Wholesome podcast, and it's all things health, wellness, and inspiration. So kind of like me, where I like to spread along the wellness wheel here of all the things. So I have, we talk about wellness and we talk about nutrition, but then we talk about spirituality and mindset and, emotional health and all these other pieces of wellness. So I love to bridge the gap, kind of like you were talking about. I love to bridge the gap between like the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual pieces of wellness and bring all of that into one place.
Yeah. And let's talk about the headache and migraine. The person with headaches and migraines. I mean, I would imagine most of my listeners have headaches and migraines. They have their own experience with it. And so what's your experience working with this type of patient population?
Yeah. So I would say At this point, I would say a good like 75 to 80% of my clients come to me with headaches as one of their main symptoms. Now, it may not be like their only, well, I would say it's never their only symptom because they're all dealing with multiple symptoms, but it's always, almost always a big symptom, whether it's the occasional headache, whether it's like severe migraines. I've had it across the board, across the spectrum. So it's very common in my world, mixed in with all these other symptoms.
Yeah. And okay, I ask most of my interviews, the people we have in the podcast, it's a common question to ask, what do you see within our healthcare setting? What's a problem? What are people searching for that they're not getting? And then how are you trying to fill that gap?
Yeah, I like that question. I could probably talk about this all day and I could go down all the rabbit holes. And so for me, it's the more women I work with, like the stronger my conviction is on this. But I feel that, and this isn't to bash doctors because doctors are important. So I want to preface it by saying that. But I feel that our conventional Western medical model is really failing us in a lot of ways, and especially when it comes to chronic disease. Like we need doctors when it comes to acute emergent situations, right? Like I want a doctor to be able to operate on me when I break my leg or whatever. But when it comes to chronic illness, I just feel like our conventional medical model just isn't serving us, because we're putting Band-Aids on things and we're treating symptoms rather than like getting through to the problem and treating the person, the human. And so that's where I'm here to bridge the gap. And because the women I work with, they've been to all the doctors. Like they've been to so many doctors, and they've either have like 28 different diagnoses from all these different doctors, or they've been to all these doctors and the doctors are telling them their labs are fine and nothing's wrong. And they're like, no, I feel like crap, like something is wrong. So for me, it's being that, like, no pun intended, like hope for them. Like there is hope of like finding healing and feeling normal again. Like I think that's something I hear probably most often is like, I just want to feel like a normal person, because they have all these symptoms they've been dealing with, and they're brushed off by the doctors, or they're sent to this doctor, and they just doctors kind of pass the buck along, and nobody really does anything to get to the bottom of why they're feeling the way that they're feeling.
Yeah. So you are having these labs drawn, you're getting the test results. Talk to us. Are these labs different than what like a primary care doctor might take? And then what are you finding in these headache and migraine patients and these people with headaches and migraines that is sort of like overlooked or misunderstood, or maybe we're just not testing for it?
Yeah. So yes, the answer to your first question, these are different labs. So functional labs are testing much more comprehensively than just like conventional labs, right? And we're looking for deeper things. So an interview I did earlier, we were talking about this, because when you go to the, just the regular doctor, whatever, and you get your labs and there's like a range, right? You're in whatever range. And if you're within range, you're like, oh, you're fine. But what people don't understand is like the range that they're giving you is basically like, well, you're not dead. So that's like the rubric that they're measuring you against. Whereas when we're looking at functional labs, it's like, okay, no, I actually want to live like optimally. Like let's look at optimal health. And so with functional labs and functional lab ranges, it's like a totally different animal. Like let's get your body working optimally. So with the labs themselves, they are much different because you're measuring things at a much more comprehensive level rather than just kind of the like generic bird's eye view. We're going like 10 layers deeper to look at things from a different perspective. So for the women that I work with that are dealing with headaches and migraines, it's usually a multitude of things, but we're measuring hormones. We're doing a really comprehensive hormone lab, and there's a lot of hormonal things going on for people that are triggering. And a lot of women I work with have like these like period induced migraines, right? Like it's that time of the month and like clockwork. It's like, oh, the migraines are coming, right? So it's a lot of times it's like this estrogen dominance that we have to get under control. And the huge spikes in estrogen and the huge drops in estrogen are just like triggering these crazy headaches and migraines. So the hormones are a big thing. I measure, there's some tests that I look at that are looking at like organic acid. So it's like the metabolites of different neurotransmitters and stuff. And so we can look at that. And that's typically plays a part too. If there's, dopamine and adrenaline, all these other issues with certain neurotransmitters and hormones. We're looking at like cortisol patterns. And when cortisol patterns are all over the place, that's going to trigger some things like headaches and migraines. I do a really in-depth GI map, a gut test that's looking at their gut. And, parasites and pathogens in the gut can be a huge trigger for inflammation in general, but especially looking at like headaches and migraines. And And a lot of people, you know, I mentioned parasites and pathogens, and people are like, oh my gosh. Because I think we think like, you know, you go to Mexico and you get Montezuma's revenge because you drink the water. Like that, yes, that's pathogen. But I think the number, if you look at the studies, it's like 60 to 65% of us are walking around with like parasites living in us. And they're not all like the side effects aren't always so blatant, like I'm, you know, puking all day or whatever. It's things just causing, it's like this underlying like little monster that's causing inflammation here and throwing some things off there. And so I find about 90% of my clients that I work with have parasites, and we're working to get rid of parasites and pathogens that are in the body that are causing symptoms like overall inflammation, which is driving those headaches and migraines.
Yeah. It's it's like you turn on the evening news and they're like, you know, tune in next time to figure out what's hiding in your shower. Like, you know, like, oh my gosh, like we have these parasites in us.
It's so true.
Yeah. But my question is, so it goes, does it go back to, if we're going to go upstream and figure out why these things are happening?
Yeah.
Is it diet? Is it exercise? Is it stress level? Is it like a history of XYZ? Like what is actually happening to cause these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think if you want to speak like generally speaking, if you want to give like a general, I mean, it's stress, right? Yeah. I mean, let's go to stress. Stress is always the answer. But stress can mean a lot of different things, right? It can mean a physical stress, like they had some like traumatic physical thing that happened to them, right? It could be just like emotional, mental stress. They've got a stressful job, stressful life, whatever, their type A personality. It could be literally be stress from like a trauma that they've endured that they haven't dealt with. There's like this emotional, mental piece that can play a part in it too, and what's happening physically in the body. So I think it all goes down to stress really, and just trying to figure out like what that stress is. If there's like a current stressor, we can pinpoint like, hey, this specific thing is what's triggering us, or is it just like chronically I've been in this stressed state for, you know, however long, and then now this is the state I'm in now. Like there's all these things dysfunctioning in the body.
Okay, so stress is playing a role. Stress can drive a lot of this stuff. And then nutrition, as what role is that playing as well? I mean, like, are we okay? I'll tee you up, you know, you'll hit this out of the park. Are we okay eating Big Macs every day? Like, how does it impact us? You know?
I would recommend no.
Yeah.
I think, yes, I mean, nutrition plays a huge piece of it. And that's another stressor on the body too. If we're talking about stress, like the traditional Western diet it's a stress on the body, right? It's high in sodium, and it's high in saturated fat that we don't need, and it's high in all kinds of processed crap that we're putting in our bodies. Like, so yeah, I mean, our conventional Western diet is a huge stressor on the body. And I think, you know, speaking of like things going in our body, the other piece of that is the things that we're putting on our body. And one of the labs that I do is a hair tissue and mineral analysis, and we're looking at minerals, and we're looking at like toxic elements and heavy metals and all these other things. But we also don't realize that what we're putting on our body can cause stress on the body, right? Then we're using, you know, certain personal care products and cleaning products, and for women, and, you know, cosmetics and all this stuff. We're putting all these things in our body, and our biggest organ, our skin, it's going into your body through your skin. And so there's so many things that we come into contact with on a daily basis, like our nutrition and all these personal care products, that are causing more stress on and in the body.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about stress, because in this podcast, when I'm going to talk about, I guess, anything within the musculoskeletal system, it all can kind of trace back to stress, physical stress, gravity weighing down on us. And we also have talked in the past couple of podcasts about how stress can actually be a good thing. So the body adapts to stress and it overcomes stress, and then we become more resilient. But this is fascinating to look at this from a perspective of like, our gut health, even things that we put on our skin, can add stress. And in a large sense, this is a negative stress. This is not something that our body's really adapting to and saying that's great, and we overcome it, we become more resilient to it. My thought here is that these stressors are not as obvious. Right. I mean, are people, you know, putting on something like, I don't know, whether it's a lotion or shampoo, or maybe the foods that we're digesting, are there immediate impacts? I mean, my gut, no pun intended, my gut tells me that these are like repeated over time, and then we start to see the results of them. And then it's just almost this like general like fatigue, headache. I'm not sleeping well. I mean, am I on the right track here?
Yeah, no, for sure. It is. I mean, it's chronic exposure to it, right? I mean, using it a few times isn't going to make a difference, but it's chronic exposure. Like, for example, I use my mom as an example. I did some labs with my mom, and my mom has dealt with migraines, like, I mean, as long as I can remember, since I was a kid. And she's done all the medicines and all the things. But I was doing some labs with her for that and for a couple other things. And my mom is somebody who wears, I mean, she's, very traditional Southern woman, and she doesn't leave the house without makeup. Like, it's 24/7. She's got the makeup on. And so we do the labs, and especially, specifically talking about the HTMA, the hair tissue analysis. And she had all of these crazy, like, toxic elements and heavy metals and stuff. And so I'm explaining the labs to her, and she was like, oh my gosh, like, what is, I'm like, Mom, it's your makeup, like you wear, and the thing is, and I think this is another thing people understand, the more expensive the makeup doesn't mean it's any cleaner than anything that's cheaper. Like, a lot of times the expensive, like, name brand stuff is the most toxic, and they'll say it's not, but it is. You have to know what you're looking at in the ingredients. So just so my mom is, and we're changing brands and changing all these things, and she's already seen changes, and I'm not kidding. She's already seen changes in how, like, she feels with, like, her hormones and her mood and her energy, like things like that. Like, just from changing, I mean, she's made some dietary changes, but just from changing her cosmetics and stuff. So it is just chronic exposure. And I think people really underestimate the impact that stuff has on you, the stuff that you put on your body has on your body itself, because your body has to filter through all of that. Like, at some point, it's got to filter through your detox organs and your liver and your lymphatic system, your kidneys. And eventually your liver's going to be like, okay, this is enough. Like, I'm kind of tired of, like, getting rid of all this stuff. And it starts to work a little less. And it just starts to cause some sluggishness in the body.
Yeah. If we're going to connect, so it's probably not like a one-to-one. I'm meaning, like, if your makeup is toxic, you get a headache that afternoon.
Right. Yes.
It's a compilation of things, right?
Totally.
And so your body's having to deal with all sorts of stuff. And so we talk about physically, like, what throughout your day can you either remove or change so that it's more therapeutic for you, as opposed to, like, increasing the amount of tension or stress through your neck.
Yep.
Is it similar here where, like, maybe changing your makeup or being mindful about the product that you apply to your skin, maybe that doesn't have, like, a dramatic impact, but it's a small change that can be made in order to, when we think about overall health.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. If are there like practical examples? So we're talking about makeup, and someone's like wondering, well, how do I know if I'm putting on some toxic makeup? Are there, like, resources for people to understand that?
Totally. Yeah. There's resources and I wish I would have thought about this before. There's apps that you can download that you can basically like scan. It's like, one is called like clean something, but you can look up apps. There's apps on your phone you can scan, and then you scan the ingredients on, like, whatever the product is, and it'll tell you, like, what it is. So it's so much easier now because a lot of it you really don't know. But it pretty much, if it's like it's kind of like with food, right? Where you said, if you can't pronounce the ingredient on the label, like, you probably shouldn't be eating it. It's kind of the same thing with cosmetics and stuff. It's like, if it's a word with like 58 different letters, like, it's probably not healthy for your body. But things like the apps is such a good resource for you to be like, okay, the app's going to explain what these ingredients are, so you can know, what's in it.
Yeah, I love that. So let's go down the road of nutrition. A lot of people associate their headaches or migraine experience with some sort of food trigger.
Yeah.
We talk about inflammation. We talk about, avoiding certain inflammatory foods, or like wine and cheese, or whatever it might be. So speak to us about what you commonly see in your demographic, like the people you're working with. What are some common threads you see with as far as foods being triggers, and then maybe actions you take to overcome that?
Yeah, so food can definitely be a trigger. And one of the first steps I take with the women I work with is we kind of work on this anti-inflammatory diet, because we want to stop inflammation and, like, stop the stress response. And so we're, like, looking at, okay, what are the biggest triggers? Sugar and alcohol, first and foremost, are always the biggest triggers, right? That's causing the most inflammation in the body. Gluten and dairy are two other ones. Now, not everyone is super sensitive to gluten. I will say that. I don't like to put a blanket statement out there that everyone is sensitive to gluten, but gluten can be a trigger. And if you're already in a like inflamed state, then it's probably going to trigger more inflammation if you're already in that state. I have found for a lot of clients, I have specific clients I can think of in my head right now, we're dealing with headaches and anxiety, like headaches and anxiety or migraines and anxiety. And I had one client, she just started the anti-inflammatory diet. And like maybe a week or so in, maybe a week and a half in, she messages me and she was like, I literally haven't had a headache in over a week, like just from getting rid of gluten. So clearly that was a trigger food for her. The gluten was a trigger. So gluten, dairy, sugar, and alcohol are like the big four like inflammatory things. And those are usually things that we eliminate those and we can kind of start to like slow it down. The other thing for people, and this isn't for everybody, but especially people who are dealing with like rheumatoid arthritis or like joint things, nightshade vegetables can be a trigger for people, and that can trigger headaches in those people as well. So nightshades are like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, like bell peppers, hot peppers, like those white potatoes. Those can be a trigger for some people, and especially if they already have a tendency towards kind of autoimmune side of things, it can trigger headaches and joint pain from eating those things. So it is important to understand how foods can trigger those things, and really just overall inflammation, because I mean that's a lot of times when we're looking at the headache situation in my world, it's just like overall inflammation, and it's just kind of like a symptom of that inflammation.
Right. And inflammation, again, it's lowering our body's threshold. Like what can it tolerate? Well, not much when it's dealing with systemic inflammation.
Yep.
So, but it's just, again, when people are trying to understand their own situation, they sometimes it's pretty obvious. They eat some form of food, like alcohol is probably the most obvious one, where they'll have a drink and then they get a headache or a migraine. But sometimes it's not that obvious, and so I think understanding these like lesser known food triggers is important for people, because then you can go down your own journey of eliminating those,
right?
Or work with someone such as yourself that can help them navigate that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about maybe some like supplements or natural remedies that you would recommend to your people that are dealing with these headaches and migraines.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I mean, there's so many directions that could go here, because of course it's going to depend on the person. But first and foremost, we're talking about just like overall inflammation. Good like natural anti-inflammatories. Turmeric is a great natural anti-inflammatory. So turmeric supplement. I really like adaptogenic herbs. They help your body's ability to kind of cope with stress. And so it helps like support your adrenals and kind of your stress response in the body. So I feel like a lot of times that can kind of like mediate the stress response, right? Or like whatever flares up, whether it's headaches or joint pain, whatever. So adaptogenic herbs, these are things like ashwagandha and rhodiola. Like these are really good things to add to your regimen to help with your body cope with stress. And then really, I think a lot of it goes to, and I'm thinking about this because the adrenals are on my mind, because I was just talking about this in another interview, but the adrenals play a huge role in this, because the adrenals are kind of responsible for the stress response. They kind of moderate your stress response in the body. And so caring for your adrenals can be super supportive. And so specifically the client I was just talking about that week, she got off the gluten, was like a week later, she's like, oh my gosh, I haven't had a headache. That was a big thing for her. And I had her on a really supportive supplement for her adrenals. And really, sodium and vitamin C, you're going to find them the most concentrated in your adrenals. They use the most. Your adrenals use the most of those two things, sodium and vitamin C. So if you can give your body a good vitamin C supplement, if you can add like good quality sodium to your diet, and I could go like a whole rabbit hole about sodium. We could have a whole other episode on this. But we're talking about sodium. I'll give you the short version. We're talking about sodium. Like we talk about the Western diet, we talk about like, oh, there's so much salt, right? And this is like the refined, like table salt. There's a difference between table salt and like good unrefined, like sea salt. And the problem is when we're eating the regular refined like table salt, it's like the equivalent of white sugar, right? It's been stripped of every nutritional value. It's used all these chemicals to get like the cheapest version possible. It's the same thing with salt. It's been through a bunch of chemicals to strip all the other things away, and it's just the sodium chloride. There's nothing else in it. So there's a difference between eating this refined table salt and eating a good quality salt, like Celtic sea salt is always my first recommendation, because it's full. It has up to like 90 to 94 other trace minerals in this salt. So you're getting the sodium, but you're getting all these other trace minerals. So it helps with the fluid balance in your cells. And so it's not just pumping you full of sodium, you're getting all these other trace minerals. So my point is, if you're looking at supporting your adrenals with good quality sodium, you're looking for a good quality. So my clients always have them adding salt to their water in the morning. They're adding like Celtic sea salt or whatever to the water in the morning to give their adrenals some support. Sodium, vitamin C are super supportive, and it really does help with, the stress response and how your adrenals cope with stress and moderating inflammation and all of that, because it's all connected.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not removing any stressful situation. I mean, on top of that, I'm sure whether it's like, going through mindfulness, breathing, whatever that might be, if we're trying to remove the stressful situation, that's another approach. But it's almost like without changing anything, just adding these little things into your diet can be beneficial to your body's natural stress response.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, of course, all those other things are important too, like the lifestyle changes and the mindfulness and the breath work, all of it all works together. But yeah, even just these small changes can mean huge. Like, again, you were talking about resiliency. It's like building that resiliency up. I mean, that's all it is. It's all building up that resiliency in the body.
Yeah, in general terms, if you had, if there's a couple thousand people that are going to listen to this episode that all have, variations of headaches or migraines, what can be some like 2 or 3 key takeaways for them?
First and foremost is, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's going to be managing stress. Like, that's going to be the big one. Whether it's, figuring out what the trigger is for you, or because a lot of times the trigger is like work, right? It's just work in general. That's the trigger. Well, I can't exactly, quit my job tomorrow. So how can we come up with some strategies to be able to cope with the stressor that's triggering, the stress response in the body? So it's also having like strategies and like tools to help you manage that. So it's whether it's, breath work or meditation or yoga or whatever mindful activity you like to do, journaling, walking in the park, or there's so many things you can do to help. That mindfulness piece really is a huge piece of the stress management, being able to help your body cope with stress and regulating your nervous system. It's all about finding ways to keep your nervous system regulated so it stays out of that fight or flight state like as much as possible, or it's able to come down from the fight or flight state when you are in a stressful situation. So the stress management piece, the nervous system regulation piece is huge. And then knowing how to use your nutrition as a way to also like manage the inflammatory response, right? Like, I mean, even if you like making it as simple as possible, it's really all like eating whole foods. Like, it's that simple. Like fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, organic meats, like just eating whole foods. Like, it's as simple as that. But knowing how to use your nutrition to moderate the stress response and to keep that stress response, at a minimum, to help keep inflammation down. And that's really what it's all about. And that's what I tell my clients, why that's the first step, is we just want to keep inflammation down. Like, how can we get inflammation down and keep it down? And eating whole foods, getting rid of the inflammatory things, or at least limiting the inflammatory things. And those big 4 I talked about, even just limiting those can be a huge step to helping with inflammation, to help with what's triggering headaches and migraines.
Yeah. So aside from getting into the nuances of, the type of salt or like the supplement we're taking, it's the whole foods. I mean, it really, just changing your diet in that positive direction, maybe removing some of those inflammatory foods, exploring that. As far as that type of diet, I mean, is there a specific diet that you recommend? Do you like prescribe diets to people? I know the Whole30, I've done it myself. I have patients that do it. Is there anything like that where people know that they can trust a process? Yeah.
I mean, essentially that's what, when I'm working with my clients, and it's not to say like they have to do this forever. It's for the purpose of us, in their healing journey. And then we start to reintroduce foods, when we get to the end of our time together. But that's basically what we do. It's like a Whole30 anti-inflammatory diet for a while. And so it's like, so I always recommend some cookbooks. It's like there's a Whole30 cookbook. There's like, and I think like paleo, right? So we're thinking like whole foods, nuts, seeds, healthy fats, fruits, veggies, So it's kind of like paleo-ish, Whole30-ish. Like those are good quality. I think those are probably like good, like safe, like I hate the word diet, but you know what I mean? Like safe diets to be like, okay, this is going to help with inflammation.
Yeah. I love it, Hope. Thank you so much for, your wealth of information. I want you to share with our listeners how they can interact with you and continue to learn from you.
Yeah, thanks. So you can find me. I spend most of my time on Instagram, so I'm at the Hope Pedraza. And then I have a free Facebook group. It's Live Wholesome and Healthy, and it's just all things functional nutrition. We do workshops and challenges and Q&A. So if you want to just come to learn and just be part of a group who likes to learn, then you can jump into the group.
I love it. Thank you again for being on the Headache Doctor podcast. I know our listeners will find a lot of value out of this.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Taves.